Okay, welcome. Thank you for coming for tonight's clinic. The material and content that I'm going to cover tonight is going to be in regards to the multiple disc clutch, as well as the differences of the multiple disc clutch transmission against the single disc clutch transmission. Next slide. Here's a picture. Transmission on the right is a single disc transmission. The one kind of in the back on the left is a multiple disc transmission. So you can kind of see a couple of both versions side by side, if you will, on the floor. Next slide. I will start off with the multiple disc clutch, which is the clutch pack itself. Here's a little backstory or a little history on the multiple disc clutch. It is an early production Model A clutch assembly. That's what it's referred as, is the multiple disc. And I will show more of what kind of the breakdown of what multiple disc, I guess, looks like. This clutch design is similar to a style that can be found in early motorcycles. The Model A multiple disc clutch pack has 4 separate clutch discs that are lined on both sides with a steel plate that's in between them. There is a single large center axis spring instead of like the single disc clutches, as many people are cognizant of. Have that pressure plate with all the springs going all around it. The multiple disc clutch has one single spring in the center. Next slide. In my research, the multiple disc clutch was offered in the Model A from the beginning of production, which was October of 27 to about November of 28. That's when the majority of them can be found in a car. The multiple disc clutch is a lighter, softer, and smoother operating clutch. It is a smaller clutch assembly and design as well. Why would one person say that the multiple disc clutch is a softer, smoother clutch? It's because the design of assembly of the clutch has 4 discs, which the more discs you have, the more slip that can allow for the engagement of the clutch when you're starting to let out the clutch pedal. So that all that slip between all those discs essentially allows for a smoother transition as the clutch starts to engage and grab and roll the car. And with the one single center spring, it kind of helps aid with an even, fully engaged clutch pack when you're compressing your clutch pedal, and it kind of allows for a lighter, softer clutch as you're working the pedal, where the pressure plate has multiple springs going around it, which can be a heavier clutch pedal as you're pressing it. I can contest to the quality and operation of the multiple disc clutch because I have a September of 28 two-door. When I bought the car in January 1st of 2019, the car was still running the multiple disc clutch, and it was running it until June of last year, which I was planning a long cross-country road trip. So I wanted to switch my car to the single disc clutch for reliability. So I drove my car for 5 years with that multiple disc without any issues. I switched, like I said, I switched the clutch styles because I wanted to have that reliability, because the multiple disc clutch does not have any replacement parts on the market. And in the swap, the first time I drove my car with the single disc clutch, I immediately was already missing my multiple disc because the clutch pedal was probably 2 to 3 times heavier. When I started letting out the clutch pedal, it was more of like a quicker lurching engagement of the clutch. It wasn't that soft, slow rolling clutch engagement that the multiple disc has. So with that, it took a little to get used to the new single disc clutch in my car again. So it was a very, very obvious difference in that clutch performance when I swapped. Here's a picture. Left is a multiple disc clutch. That's the clutch pack itself. And as you can see, there's each one of those rows of teeth is a single disc itself, is a different clutch disc. And then on the right side is your single disc, the one that most people are aware of and familiar with. You have that one single clutch disc that's lined on both sides with a single contact on each side of that. Here again is another picture of the multiple disc clutch. You can kind of see on the left, that's the front side, or the side that you would see when you have your transmission separated from your engine. So the right picture, as you can see, the shaft is going through it. So that is the back side, which is the input side of the transmission. Here's a couple other pictures. Left photo kind of shows a side profile of the multiple disc clutch. As you can see, each one of the linings that has the metal teeth has clutch linings on both sides, and then there's a metal disc in between each one of those. And then a key point with the multiple disc clutch, every clutch pack needs to have the back disc, which is closest to the input side of the transmission. There should be one tooth on that disc that has a little notch in it. The reason for that notch is because that clutch lining, those teeth are just ever so slightly wider than the other two discs. And the reason for that is it allows for it's the last clutch disc to engage the flywheel. And with that, it tightens the clutch pack within the flywheel, so there's not any slop as the clutch is kind of flopping left and right or back and forth within the flywheel. So that disc with the notch needs to be the rear disc. Otherwise, if it's any one forward, you may not get the clutch pack into your flywheel. So in my research, this also kind of explains it a little bit more. I found on FordGarage.com, our past club member, Tom Wesenberg, had posted this on FordGarage.com back in August of 2008. He said the clutch discs are 6 3/8 OD and 4 3/8 ID by 150 thousandths thick for each of the 8 linings needed to make up the 4 driving discs of the multiple disc clutch pack. Also notice the notch on the edge of the tooth on the woven lining that indicates the clutch disc, slightly wider teeth, and is located closest to the throw bearing as the disc moves least when the clutch pedal is depressed. Having one disc with wider teeth helps keeps the clutch pack snug in the flywheel and allows for the release of the discs when the pedal is pressed. And then moving on to Dave Gerald had lent me a specialty tool for the clutch pack. So there's a specialty tool for the multiple disc. As you see in the picture, I have it up here. Essentially, there's three little posts in it. Those 3 posts, what they do is they align all the teeth. So in the clutch pack, you kind of saw all those teeth. You have to line every single one of those teeth so they're square. So when you slide it within the flywheel, they can go within the receiving grooves within the flywheel. Otherwise, if they're not aligned, you won't be able to get that clutch pack slid into the flywheel. And this tool helps aid with the disassembly of the clutch pack, disassembly and reassembly. So there's a couple other photos. There's kind of the underside of it. There's kind of written out the markings that are on it. It's made by a K.R. Wilson from Buffalo, New York. And then moving on to, this is the initial disassembly of what would be the multiple disc clutch pack. So as you can see in the photo on the left, the clutch pack slides down the shaft of the tool. And then you have to remove that snap ring, which would remove the throwout bearing off the very rear of the clutch pack. And once you get that snap ring out, you can pull the throwout bearing off. Dave?
Blaine, if I can interject as long as you're talking about disassembly.
Sure.
It's very important that when you take those clutch packs apart.
Yes.
That you mark the teeth.
Yes.
You noted that?
Yes, I did not, but yes, that's a good point that I kind of forgot to I guess, to know.
The reason behind that is, as the clutch pack is in the flywheel,
Mhm.
you have to picture that there's the same matching grooves in the flywheel.
Yep.
And as that torque is transmitted from the flywheel to the clutch pack, it wears little grooves into the flywheel. And if you don't put them back together the way they were, they can hang up. You can get actually a clutch hanging up where it doesn't it doesn't fully engage.
Yep.
So you know, a white marker, paint marker would save you a lot of hassle.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's from where?
Where
You
yes.
want to get it back where?
Yes.
to
Yes.
go.
Yes.
So essentially what Dave Garrell here is explaining is when you're disassembling, pulling your engine and transmission, before you separate your engine and transmission, you want to mark Sharpie, paint marker, whatever you have available to you, you want to mark tooth for tooth your clutch pack against your flywheel. So you put tooth for tooth back in the same groove. Because even though that clutch may have been in that flywheel for all these years or whatever, the teeth don't wear evenly. You'll pull a clutch pack out and you'll see one tooth on one side of the flywheel has a groove in it, and that tooth on the corresponding clutch pack is very wide. And you look at the opposite 180 corner, and that tooth is half as wide as it should be. And if you start flipping teeth for teeth within the flywheel, what happens, as Dave explained, when you press your clutch pedal, that clutch pack opens and it can get hung up in the worn grooves within the flywheel if you're not matching that tooth for tooth from the clutch to the flywheel.
I also wanted to add too that, speaking of Tom, before he passed away, when he was moving out of his home, he gave me a bunch of early style flywheels that had very little wear on the internal teeth, and he said, get them to the club members when they need them. So if anybody needs one, I have some in my storage.
That's good to know. Great. Yeah.
One thing about that, you know, a lot of, I was a machinist and I was a maintenance machinist, repairing big equipment, lathes, milling machines, and big drill pressing and stuff. They all use multiple disc clutches, but they run them in oil, and that helps with not having those grooves in the drum. Because once those grooves get in the drum, you're kind of messed up.
Yep. Yeah.
If you put new lining in there or something, now that they're not in that groove anymore.
Yeah.
You know, and so that was probably the big drawback. If it was.
That is probably one of the drawbacks of the multiple disc, as the clutch discs wear and the grooves within the flywheel wear. It's almost kind of like a one and done. Once they're worn, they're almost both throw away.
The Model T Ford has a multiple disc clutch too,
Sure.
but it runs in oil.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, because the Model T kind of has a planetary gear system as well. Yep. So in this photo, you can kind of see I have the clutch pack. I got the throwout bearing on the left photo taken off. The clutch pack is sitting in the tool. Photo on the right, I'm screwing down the handle, and then moving to the next slide. Photo on the left, it's showing that the spring within the center of the clutch pack is fully decompressed in its expanded shape. On the photo on the right, you can see I turn the handle down farther, which compressed that spring. Now, when that spring is fully compressed, you can see the clutch discs also kind of separate. And when that happens, you can loosen them, those nuts. So the next slide. So here you can take the nuts off that back with the spring compressed in the tool. And then as you loosen the handle, the spring naturally pops that back plate off and then completely decompresses and neutralizes the spring tension within the clutch pack. So then there's a couple of photos of the clutch pack with that back plate and the spring out of it. You can kind of see the center drum and,
Do you want to go back?
yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm getting doing wishes.
So yeah, in the photo on the left, you can see just kind of overall photo of it. On the right, you can see the inner drum. So there's a center drum. These posts go through to the front plate. You'll see it more in the exploded view that I have on the next slide. But you can kind of see the markings in the bottom of the drum where the spring kind of wore a little bit. Next slide. Here in this slide, I kind of provided a full exploded view component, left to right, kind of front to back, if you will. So on the left would be the front side of the clutch pack, which would be the flywheel side, engine side. And then working from left to right, you're essentially working towards input shaft of the transmission. So you have your clutch flywheel end plate, and then you have all your clutch discs as well as your steel contacts in between. I have them all up here, so if you want to see a little closer, you're welcome to come on up and look at them. And then all those clutch discs all slide over that center drum. And that center drum essentially lines, so the steel contacts between each of the clutch discs that have the linings on them, they have teeth on the inside of the discs. And the clutch discs that have the linings on them, they're the ones with the teeth on the outside, as you've seen in the full clutch disc clutch assembly. So the steel contact plates are what get aligned by the center drum. And then the other ones that have the external teeth get aligned by the tool. So then you can see the center drum, you have your spring, you have your back plate, and then your throw bearing and snap ring. There's a couple of photos of the front end plate, which would be the flywheel side for the engine side. There again, there's a close-up of the all the discs. Again, you can kind of see the disc on the far left, per se, has all the teeth on the external side, where then the one on the inside, or in the center with the red arrow, you can see has the teeth internally, which interlock on the center drum. There's the center drum, which has all those teeth, all those grooves, that those steel contact plates all slip and align with. There's the other side of this center drum, and then you have your center spring.
Blaine?
Yep.
I don't know if you're gonna mention this, but on the early trucks, their serial numbers were AA. That's how we get the AA.
Right.
For the 1.5 for the commercials.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they did that, the engines and everything are exactly the same, but it's that spring is heavier in the truck, so that's why they put the AA
Oh, okay.
designation on the early trucks.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. And the AA's, didn't they have a different transmission altogether? Didn't they have a 4-speed, or did that come later?
4-speed came out later.
It started in January of.
They had a regular 3-speed in them.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Okay, so it was just the heavier spring in the clutch pack on the early ones.
And then they put an auxiliary 2-speed behind the
Ah,
transmission
okay.
for
Okay,
added.
that's good to know. I did not know that.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of photos of the back plate, kind of just showing both sides. Now moving on to the flywheel. Here you can kind of see left side, multiple disc flywheel, right side would be a single disc flywheel, what most of you are familiar with. There again, multiple disc on the left, single disc on the right. The back side of them look almost identical, so you really couldn't tell unless if you looked at the front side.
There's a lot of wear here.
Yes, that
The
one.
tooth is gone.
Yes, so that flywheel I had gotten off a motor that was sitting on a dirt floor in a outbuilding. So that flywheel was sitting in the dirt for many, many years. So it's all rusted.
Could you back up and show the difference, the noticeable difference? Oh, okay.
Yep.
There you go.
Yep, I have more close-ups of the multiple discs coming up. Yep.
Is that flywheel way lighter?
Does it what?
Is that flywheel way lighter?
Oh, gosh, they're both pretty heavy. They're both pretty heavy. I don't know which one I would say is lighter.
One of them is less heavy.
I honestly wouldn't, I wouldn't even have a guess on which one was lighter. They're both probably pretty similar in weight. Yeah. Yeah, I would need a scale to weigh them individually and see kind of the difference. There's a close-up of the teeth.
This is the inside?
Yep, this would be the inside. This would be the teeth that the clutch pack slide in.
Is that is that a hole?
Yes, the flywheel does have a couple of large holes in it. I'm assuming it's for, as the clutch wears and you have that clutch dust, it's something for the dust to fall out and dispense out of the clutch area.
Okay.
So I'm assuming it's more of like a drain hole for the clutch disc material. I don't think there's really anything useful for that hole other than that. Here's another close-ups, a couple close-ups of the flywheel. You can kind of see with the lighting a little different angle of the teeth on the left. Photo on the right shows closer up. You can kind of see those notches in each of the teeth. That's where the tooth and teeth of the clutch pack wear the steel from the flywheel away. So if you can imagine switching your clutch pack tooth for tooth to a different groove, some of those grooves might be worn more on one side than the other, and as that clutch separates and moves back and forth, they hang up on the worn grooves. Here's a couple of photos showing the clutch slipping in and out of the flywheel. On the photo on the left is more kind of a wide angle showing the whole thing. So you can kind of see about how far in. It actually should go in a little bit more than that. The photo on the right kind of shows a little closer up, and again, you can see the notch in that one tooth, which should be the clutch disc that's closest to the back side of the flywheel or the outside of the flywheel. Couple other close-ups you can kind of see on the left, kind of how it starts to engage and slide in.
But wait a minute. There is a notch tooth on the left photo.
Yes.
It's furthest away from the flywheel.
So that's from as the clutch slides in. So as it slides in, it's the rear disc closest to the outside of the flywheel.
Oh, so you have it laying on top,
Yes.
but it actually goes inside.
So it slides in that photo on the left, it slides downwards in those grooves.
All right, I get it now. Because I was
Yes.
trying to figure that one out. Because it's
Yes.
like you just said, it's supposed to be the closest to the flywheel, and it's not in that picture.
Yep. No, I guess it's a little deceiving, but yes, as the clutch pack slides down into those grooves, that notch would be closest to the top.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yes.
It's helpful.
And then now I'm going to move on to some of the cast parts of the transmission and the differences between multiple disc cast parts for the transmission as well as the single disc cast parts. So I just put this as kind of a little bit of a header for everyone. On the left side, all the photos on the left side will be all the components that are related to the multiple disc transmission, and everything on the right will be the single disc. So here you can see transmission cases. Transmission case on the left, again, multiple disc. One on the right is a single disc. As you can see, the biggest difference in this photo is the single disc has 4 extra holes in it. Because the single disc has that sleeve that bolts onto the front of the transmission where the throw bearing slides on. On the multiple disc, that's a part of the clutch assembly, which is bolted to the input shaft and becomes basically a fixed part of the input shaft, and the spring is what allows the clutch to move back and forth. Here on the rear side of the transmission case, it's also on both sides, but in this photo you can kind of see it better than some of the other photos I had on the front. The multiple disc transmission on the left, what I have seen in the multiple disc transmissions that I've tore apart, which would be an early transmission, obviously, I have noticed that the retaining ring deep in the transmission case is a machined counterbore ring. Where when you get to the later single disc transmissions, which have those 4 bolts on the front, they have a snap ring that's snapped into like an O-ring groove. So if you have you have those cases and you see one with a snap ring, you can almost guarantee it's going to be for a single disc and would have those 4 bolts on the front side of the case. If you see that recessed counterbore with a machined in counterbore, it's probably going to be multiple disc. Not saying that maybe some of the early single disc transmission cases didn't have that counterbore hole in it. I think I did run into, I think I do have one in my collection of parts that is single disc, but has the machine counterbore. But most of the single discs that I have tore apart have the snap ring in it. Now this is moving on to the clutch housing. You can see, again, kind of the left multiple disc to the right single disc.
Multiple discs are painted nicer.
Yes. That one was pretty scrubby, and I needed to clean that one up. I would have had grease and grime all over me.
I noticed the notch.
Yes.
Multi-disc.
Yep. So I'll get into some of the more of the details between the two as we progress through the slides here. Here's kind of a different angle of them. Again, multiple disc is the far one, the single disc is the closest one on the right.
Is the research standard on multiple disc? Go back, right there, on the, where the throw bearing would be.
Kind of up over here, yep.
Yep, right there. You got one on each side.
Yep, I think I have seen the multiple discs that I have do have the greasers on it. Mm-hmm. There again is kind of looking at the top side. If this one is kind of flipped, the closest one is multiple disc, or this one is single disc.
So this is multi?
Yep, that's multi-disc.
We can tell because it's painted.
Yep. So I was just kind of showing different angles of both of the flywheel housings together. As the slides progress here, go to the next one. Okay. Again, different angle, showing them both side by side. Next slide. Here on the multiple disc, you'll see there's kind of this pad, which the single disc does not have. The single disc has these 2 ribs instead, which are probably the biggest obvious sign, which is one of the signs I look for. I've had a few people ask if their cars had multiple disc or the single disc clutch, and climbing underneath the car, if you can look at your flywheel housing, kind of right where the radius fall, right here at the bottom, and you see those 2 ribs, you can almost guarantee you're going to have a single disc clutch. Just with that signifier without undoing any bolts or anything. Here on the clutch shaft, you can see the multiple disc on the left is kind of just a machine boss coming off, where the single disc has kind of a whole protrusion going down it. Another obvious sign of the differences. Next slide. Again, another photo side by side showing the multiple disc has that pad. I don't know if that was for stampings. I think there is an A stamped on there. I don't know if they maybe have that lost there for the intention of maybe stamping some part numbers in it. But the single disc does not have that. Again, other side for the clutch shaft, you can see single or multiple disc just has a boss with a greaser. The other side, or the single disc, it has kind of a whole protrusion on it. Now, here you can, this kind of shows the profile. So when we get to the next side, you'll kind of see the difference. But if this is the multiple disc clutch housing. If you look at the red line there, you can kind of see how the straight vertical red line is very short and then starts to taper right away up to that straight wall. Now, if we go to the next slide, you can see the single disc has a very tall, straight sidewall before it starts to taper. And then the taper is almost at a different angle because of how straight that is. The reason for that is the single disc clutch. You have your flywheel, and then you have your clutch disc and your pressure plate. It just becomes a very deep and wide sized clutch assembly, which is why they went with a longer, straighter profile on the clutch housing. So another very obvious sign, you can see that clutch housing is for a single disc clutch. The brake shafts, clutch shafts, different sizes. Multiple disc is 1/2 inch, 5/8, and then the single disc is larger. I think that's 3/4. Looking at the transmission case side of the clutch housing, the multiple disc has a very small hole with a little lobe at the bottom. Single disc is a very large hole because of that sleeve that bolts right to the front face of the transmission. That's that large of a diameter, so that has to slip through that hole. The access opening for the clutches, single disc, very large because that clutch assembly is a very wide and large clutch assembly. The multiple disc is very small in diameter and compact. So the access opening is also very small. Again, kind of showing that pad and those ribs. Next slide. Here's the inside of both housings. You can kind of see there's a few slight differences looking on the inside. Obvious one is the multiple disc, kind of right down where the radius ball bolts on. There's a very tall rib. The single disc has just a very short, stubby rib. Even the throwout bearing forks, very different. As you can see, the multiple disc is almost kind of a straight angled throwout bearing fork, where the single disc clutch almost kind of has a round radius, wide angled throwout bearing fork. Input shafts, also very different. Multiple disc has a threaded end, as well as more square keyed grooves and teeth. Further back on the input shaft, the single disc does not have a threaded end on it, and the teeth, the grooves are closer to the end of the input shaft instead. Now moving on to some of the pedals. Pedals are different, kind of in their shape, form, size. Here you can kind of see both pedals side by side. On the left, multiple disc. On the right, single disc. You can kind of see the curve and angles of the pedals are different. The placement of the clutch adjuster is also very different. Multiple disc on the left, single disc on the right. You can see the multiple disc is very forward and closer to the shaft of the pedal, where the single disc is rotated further away and almost closer to 180 degrees from the shaft of the pedal. There again, you can kind of see the side profile. You can see the difference in angle on the left photo between the two pedals on that clutch adjuster. I will get into that more on why that's like that. Here you can kind of see I use just a 1/2-inch drive extension to kind of align the shaft holes and kind of put the pedals in alignment of each other. You can kind of see how the foot pedal also is at a completely different angle between the two pedals because of how the shaft of the pedal comes off and angles up to the floorboard. It's all different. So then the foot pedal has to be tipped at different angles accordingly. Now here, kind of going back to what I mentioned a minute ago, you can see that the clutch adjusters on the left multiple disc, very, very short. The multi-disc is only 3¼ inch long for the clutch adjuster. Single disc is 4¼ So because of the length, that 1-inch length difference between the two, that's why those ears on the pedals themselves are rotated at such a far angle from one another. It's because that adjuster is longer on the single disc, so they have to turn those ears on the pedal farther to allow for that longer travel on the adjuster. Brake pedals. Here you can kind of see the two pedals side by side. In this shot, they don't look very much different. I would say between the two, the brake pedals are probably the closest to being similar to each other, but there are a few differences. They're a little harder to tell. One, again, I kind of have them laying on the floor at the same angle in the same spot. You can see the multiple disc on the left. That foot pedal is very close to the floor, laying at the same angle. Single disc sits a little higher up off the floor. Here's kind of showing a side profile of the shaft, where the pedals would go through the shaft on the clutch housing. You can see how the single disc, I kind of have them flip-flop in this photo, but the single disc is on the left. You can see how much wider and larger the boss is, because that shaft on the clutch housing is that much bigger. You can almost even see the multiple disc has a taper, a real sharp draft taper to the boss on the pedal. There again, this picture kind of shows the bore diameter sizes of the pedals, how different they are, how much larger the single disc clutch is. Photo on the left, single disc clutch pedal is on the top, multiple disc is on the bottom. So this is looking at the same side of the pedal, but you can see the single disc has that obvious kind of machined ear on one half of the pedal. It's kind of a natural stopper for the pedal. The multiple disc does not have that. And then, oh, actually, can you go back to that? Go back. The photo on the right, you can kind of see for the brake rod, you can kind of see how those ears on the pedal kind of bend at a different angle. The multiple disc kind of has a very sharp sweeping curve with a more sharp angle where the brake rod connects to the pedal, where the single disc, which is the one on the left, has kind of a smoother transition arc tab for that brake rod. The corner closer to the pedal, farthest, you can kind of see through the single disc has kind of a little squiggle in it, where the multiple disc is more just kind of a real smooth transition. Now onto the floorboards. So with the replacement of my transmission going from the multiple disc to the single disc, I had to also cut a new board for the floorboard to allow for the shape and placement of those new pedals. Here's kind of showing both boards side by side. Top one, multiple disc, bottom one is the single disc that I had to make myself for my clutch and transmission swap. Here they're kind of laid over one another. You can kind of see from the back side of both boards. So this is looking from the engine side, firewall side of the car. Clutch pedal, as we kind of seen with the clutch pedals themselves, they were very different in how they were bent and formed and shaped. So in this photo, you can see the clutch pedal, how different that cutout is for the pedal to travel on the floor. But the brake pedals look very close to the same. You can kind of see.
Did you just lose power? Battery?
The brake pedal, okay. I don't know if I got the timer or just shut off. But the brake pedal on the left, you can kind of see the openings on there are very close to one another, but yet they kind of, I think they're flush on the right side of the photo, but there's a little bit of a gap difference on the left.
So are the pedals further apart physically on the
I think
clutch versus the single clutch?
I think it's more how the pedals bend and curve up to the floorboard where you would put your foot on the pedal itself. I think the curvature of the pedal itself changes, which is why the floorboard is a little different. I would have to measure the pedals to see. Oh, the battery might be dead.
Yeah, you're running this one.
So I would have to measure both the clutch and the brake pedals to see if there's a difference in the width. I guess I did not do that. But that would be something I could do and follow up on a later date.
Because it looks like there's quite a bit of difference.
Yeah.
But you didn't feel like there was a big difference when you started driving it after the single clutch got put in versus the multi-clutch. You said it was more difficult to drive because it's more spring compression.
Yes.
But you didn't notice anything about position of pedals.
No, I wouldn't say the position of the pedals on the floor itself were
Because I think
much
you would have
different.
noticed.
Yeah. There might be a difference in where the pedals are on the floor from the from the multiple disc to the single disc. I don't know if it's as significant enough as what I felt when operating the clutch.
You want this one back?
I think is the battery good now?
Switch batteries. They just switched batteries.
Okay, yeah, I'll use this.
We're gonna go for the top view.
So there's kind of a top view. You can kind of see again the difference. On the left, you can see with the arrows, kind of shows the difference between the single disc floorboard and the multiple disc. Again, on the right, you can kind of see a little from a different angle. You can see more obviously how different they are.
Ready for your last slide?
Yep.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, what I really want to say, you did a fantastic job on this.
Thank you.
I've heard so many stories about what these are. So my question to you is this: so you say you want to put that multiple disc clutch back in your 28,
Yes.
and you said there really isn't any parts available to restore it.
Yep.
How are you going to try to accomplish restoring it? I mean, would you take the clutches in somewhere, get them relined or shave them, or what would you do?
I have acquired, I think actually from Tom Wesenberg's estate, I did acquire a clutch pack that is virtually NOS. Yep. Yep. And I think I do have another flywheel that's very close to NOS, if not just very slight wear. So something like that, I would try and find the best flywheel possible, the best clutch pack possible, with the least amount of wear and pair them together.
I got another question quick.
Yes,
What's the longevity of that?
well,
Put it all together, and what do you expect to get out of it?
well, I'm assuming with the transmission and clutch and flywheel that my car had, that I was running up until last summer, is the original flywheel and clutch to the car. The guy that I bought it from, he told me he bought this particular car because of how original and unmolested it was. And I remember him mentioning that it had this different clutch, but I didn't understand what it was he was talking about until I started investigating and tearing my car apart and realizing, oh, this is what he was talking about. And then that's when I started to investigate more of the history and the story behind it, if you will. And my car has over 70,000 miles on it. And the flywheel and clutch is still, I think, in very good usable condition. Shows obvious wear, but not to the point that it can't continue to be run and operated. It would definitely be because that clutch and that flywheel are worn as much as they are, I would keep those two paired together because the wear, they go together. I wouldn't be putting a new clutch pack in the flywheel that's worn. It's kind of like, think of it as like your brake pads and your rotors. You're not gonna take old brake pads and put them on a new rotor, or vice versa. You're gonna try and have as new of both parts as you can and pair them together. So because they're both worn together, I would keep them together. Dave?
You know, the clutch discs with the wear surfaces on them?
Yep.
I've got it down in my phone here. Fort Wayne Clutch and Driveline down in Fort Wayne, Goshen Road, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Okay.
They'll resurface those.
Okay.
I've had 2 sets redone.
Really?
Over the years.
So you had new clutch linings riveted to the discs?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, and I figured as far as putting new clutch linings on the discs, that probably wouldn't be the most difficult part. It would be the finding a clutch pack that isn't worn beyond belief, that those teeth are just pointed real sharp and worn to not have any tightness within the flywheel, because as those teeth wear, they start slopping more and more, and then that wear in the flywheel becomes more accentuated. So I would definitely, back to your point, Doug, restoring a car and trying to have that original multiple disc clutch, I would try and find the newest clutch pack, the newest flywheel, both NOS as possible, and restore from there. If you had to, like Dave said, I think there are a lot of brake lining and clutch lining businesses could reline multiple disc clutch. I don't think that's very hard to do.
I'm sorry, guys, this has really got me going.
Yeah.
So then in your travels.
Yep.
Do you run into a lot of parts for those?
Actually, I've actually been running across, and I have acquired quite a few multiple disc parts. I probably have, this is one of maybe 3 flywheels I have. I also have probably, oh gosh, I probably have 4 or 5 clutch packs right now as well. Yep, and then as far as complete multiple disc transmissions, I probably have 3 to 5 multiple disc transmissions with the castings, the cases, the bell housings, all of that. So yeah, they're out there. It's just a matter of, I guess, putting the word out if you needed them and people let you know. Raj Anderson's been pretty helpful with helping me acquire the multiple disc parts that I have now. So I thank him for that. Mark?
So Ford engineered this and used it for a relatively short time.
Yep.
Had a lot of expense in creating it.
Yep.
I wonder who whispered into his ear, was it, hey, there's too many pieces, it's too expensive? Or did they start to see wear issues, or it was too complicated to
Mhm.
fix.
Yeah, I haven't found any, historical writings on that. But I would presume because of the difficulty in assembling the clutch pack, needing that specialty tool to assemble it, having all of those disc linings, it's a lot of parts, and each one of those parts become more and more costly. And I think going from the multiple disc to the single disc was more of a cost reduction move for the company than it was part failure. I know there is a lot of word amongst a lot of people that the multiple disc clutches were prone to exploding and flying apart. I think that might be the case with them if the car has sat for many years, and I think that's mostly the case with the multiple disc clutch, is when a car has that clutch and sits for 20, 30 years, those clutch discs become seized to those contact plates, and then when you start to use it, it just kind of pulls the thing apart. It's kind of one clutch disc is trying to pull the lining one way, and the other clutch disc is trying to pull it the other way, and it just kind of breaks the clutch linings, and then it kind of explodes and falls apart. Ken?
Blaine, I've played with Model 8s forever, and I always thought that, you know, those multiple disc clutches, they would have been pulling them out, throwing them away because of the dust issue and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And now you're saying you had 70,000 miles on it, and you took it out just for the nuts of it. You know what
Yes.
I mean, because you wanted to take this trip.
Yep.
And you probably could have left it in and got another 70 out of it. And I'm pretty impressed with that.
Yep.
Because I know that the racers use multiple disc clutches.
Okay.
So I don't know if, like you say, maybe if they sat around and got rusted up, they were a problem. But apparently they were pretty darn good clutches. Otherwise, those racer guys wouldn't be putting them in to abuse the crap out of them. Maybe they went and got truck ones
Right.
with the heavy spring. You know? But I always thought they would be terrible. And then now I feel better because I got two early trucks.
Yep. Yeah, I absolutely love the multiple discs that I have in my car, and now that I swapped, I almost really want to go back.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Which starter do you find in your car when you took it apart?
Actually, I don't know that question. I know I'm actually still running the same starter that my car had with the multiple disc. I'm still running that starter now with the single disc clutch setup.
There was a change sometime in 2018 when they changed the drive on the starter from the Eagle style, which was the earlier one.
Okay.
They had 1/2-inch armature shafts in the starters.
Mm-hmm.
And then they released the design, appendix design that was the same as the later starters, but it fit on the 1/2-inch armature, which is what the early starters had.
Okay.
When they released that Bendix starter drive, they had to relieve that angled surface that you see on your flywheel there.
This here?
Yep. So it would avoid the bolt heads on the Bendix drive.
Oh, sure.
Some of the early flywheels, that's a square shoulder.
Okay.
Just for mixing and matching parts, that will not work with the Bendix starter drive.
Okay.
So the Eagle drives are really hard to find. If you're looking for flywheels, look for that.
Okay. Brad?
Yeah, you had a chance to drive a V8 clutch and compare the slip pressure between that and the multiple disc?
Yes, actually, I did drive one car a couple of years ago that had the V8 clutch in it.
Was it similar or?
I actually felt like that was still very heavy. My multiple disc is like very soft, like you can almost put your toes on it and think goes to the floor.
My V8 clutch, I can't reach in the car with a regular clutch, push the clutch down low. With the V8.
Yeah, I with the multiple disc, you can push it with your arm and not really have to work hard at it. Dale?
Okay, you've answered every question that I have.
except one, and it's gotta be on other people's mind, because I know nothing about these things,
Yep.
which is proof positive. You don't have to know anything about a Model 8 to hold a microphone, except that one. But is there any component from the two clutch assemblies and the transmissions that you can interchange?
So I guess I would say no, however, I did purchase a couple of transmissions from other people. And as I started tearing those transmissions down, one of them, I think actually the transmission that this flywheel was paired with, the engine that had this and the transmission that was sitting next to it, at first glance, looked like a multiple disc transmission. It had the multiple disc clutch housing, it had the multiple disc clutch pack on it. I think it may have even had an early shift tower on top. But as I started tearing the transmission down and got down to the case and the guts of it, the case was actually a late single disc case. So somebody took a single disc case and converted it to look like a multiple disc, which you can do. You can take the single disc parts to make a multiple disc part, but you can't take the multiple disc parts to make a single disc. You almost have to start with a single disc transmission if you're going to go to the single disc clutch. Because you could take the multiple disc case, but you would have to find a machine shop or have the tooling to be able to drill and tap these 4 holes in the front. Then you could use that for the single disc. But you would have to figure out that bolt circle and then drill and tap those holes. That's probably the one biggest hang up from being able to use multiple disc parts for the single disc. A lot of the components are just one-offs for each clutch. Like I kind of showed in the photos of the clutch housings, the single disc clutch has that longer, straighter profile because the single disc clutch pack is so much taller and thicker. So it needs that clutch housing to go farther straight up to fit that clutch in it. So you couldn't use a multiple disc housing on the single disc. It would be curious to try and put the later single disc clutch housing on a multiple disc. Well, actually, no, that wouldn't work because the hole in the center is so big.
Right.
That wouldn't work. So yeah, to your point, I would say probably the only part that's interchangeable would be the case itself. And the transmission case, you can take a later transmission case, which has the 4 holes in the front. You could take that and convert it to look like a multiple disc if you wanted to.
What about the bearing container?
There really wouldn't be any hold up with that. I believe with the bearing, the size bearing, all of that is the same. Input shafts, they're like the same length. It's just you need those 4 holes for your throwout bearing on the single disc.
So at the swap meets, you gotta know what you're looking at.
Yep. So if you see a transmission case and you think, oh, I'm gonna build a transmission, and you grab the one without those 4 holes in the front, you're gonna learn quickly. You start cleaning it and painting it, and you start putting your transmission together, and you need those 4 holes for your throwout bearing, and you don't have them.
Talking from experience?
Nope. Yes.
Is the front half of the clutch housing part that bolts to the engine? Is that the same?
Yes. Yes.
So when you changed yours, you could just
everything.
pull it off, change the flywheel.
Correct. Yep. So the yes, the clutch housing that you refer to, both of them have the same bolt pattern to the flywheel housing, which is bolted to the back of the block. Yep, those bolt patterns are different, so you can interchange those clutch housings without having to swap other parts. I would say the one problem I did run into, it was a very small, but it hung me up for a week or two. When I converted from the multiple disc to the single disc, as I was starting to put the single disc components, the flywheel housing back on the block, and I put the new single disc flywheel up, and I started bolting things, the bolts for the flywheel to the end of the crank. And then I was starting to get to the point of putting the pressure plate on, the clutch disc in and the pressure plate on, and when I set the pressure plate on, the pressure plate wouldn't seat flat against the flywheel. It wobbled and had probably a 1/4 inch gap where it was getting pushed out from the flywheel. What I found out is the retainer plate that holds the flywheel to the end of the crank, those are different. So I had to order that $2.50 part out of the catalog and it hung me up for a week waiting for it to come in the mail. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
If there's nothing else, let's get back at, we'll give it 20 minutes. Back at 10 to 9, socialize, check out these parts up here, coffee treats are in the kitchen.
Very good.